There he is.
Hey, how you
hit
doing,
it.
Connor?
What
Yeah,
up?
guys. I mean, I
to
wanted
see
the
you.
chatter to go on. I feel like I'm on sports talk radio,
You
long time
are.
listener,
You are.
first time caller, right?
Yeah, well, good to have you here.
No, it's great to have you. You had a thoughtful comment. I just said, come on the show. You were like, I'm game. Let's do it. So
Let's
here
do
we
it.
are.
Well,
Great to have
let's
you.
start with that thoughtful comment. I mean, first introduce yourself, break down who you
Yeah,
are,
of
but
course.
then, yeah.
No, happy to. I help lead our national security and defense investments here at Lightspeed. Been here for 5 years. Used to sit on that side of the table. Actually served in the military for a better part of the decade. So excited to chat. I think there's a lot of spice. I mean, love Delian to death, but let's get into it.
Wait, and set the table for us on like size, scale of Lightspeed, and then is defense tech like
course.
its own fund, or are you just making investments?
Yeah, obviously. So history, Silicon Valley firm, been around for 25 years. I mean, we talk about ourselves like a platform. So we'll write a $1 million check early, or we'll deploy $1 billion late. So have the full kind of stack platform. Obviously based here in Silicon Valley, but have offices in reach globally. I sit on the frontier tech team. So myself, Ravi and Ravi Raj, and Taggart really invest in we call frontier tech. What I lead a lot of is all our national security, all of our defense stuff. And it comes out of the same core fund. So it's not a separate thing where we have to deploy $500 million a year in this. It's really kind of up to the team and up to how we see the ecosystem.
Cool. That's very helpful. Let's go to the drama. You and Delian. Break it down.
Before
Before
the drama, I'd love, we were actually talking with Delian how, the last 2 years, a lot of VCs, went, amended their LP agreements and said, well, actually, I fancy myself a bit of a defense investor myself. I think we all did that. I did that as an angel, right? I've got my bets.
Yeah.
Everybody realized it was cool to be a patriot.
Yep.
Do you think that it's, are there real blind spots for investors that don't have military backgrounds? We just had Steve Simone on the show from Allen Control Systems. He was a nuclear engineer in the Navy. Like that clearly sort of informs how he thinks. How much of an edge do you think you have because you actually have lived on the customer side?
I mean, like most things in life, if you haven't lived and breathed the problem, it's really hard to roll up your sleeve and understand like what's real and what isn't. I think the thing that's quite obvious, though, is the fundamental pace of change of technology is happening so quickly that even what I was talking about 10 years ago, and I sat out in the Pacific kind of before the Pacific was cool. I wrote a million memos about hypersonics and space-based systems, and I worked directly for the kind of the 4-star command of the Pacific. And like we were talking about basic shit back then. Like we just didn't have enough mass on systems. So I do think there's this clear edge of understanding who the customer is. More importantly, like the crazy thing about defense tech that I think not a lot of people realize is there's really not the concept of product-led growth. Like you can't just dog food something with a customer and then all of a sudden the colonel or the general out in the Pacific is like, great, I'm going to buy $100 million of this thing. I mean, it's not how it works. I mean, Congress has to say, we have program offices. We have this complexity of just utter chaos that makes this really hard. So, long story short, it definitely gives me an edge. I just think things are evolving so quickly that, again, the edge isn't enough. Like, you need to get lucky 100 times. I mean, what does Trey say all the time? Like, they got kicked in the face for 7 years straight at Anduril before coming today. So it's not easy. Like, to be clear, I'm not pounding the drum that like there's going to be 100 Andurils. Like, I hate to break it to you, there's not. There's going to be a lot of investors who are going to lose their shirts. There's going to be a lot of entrepreneurs who are going to try and fail. But as the cold-blooded American who served and been on that side of the, like, this is all not good for us. More people building new technology to get in the hands of warfighters. The question is, like, as a DoD, are we going to get out of our own way and buy the right stuff at the right timeline?
Yeah, I was always bullish on that with the hard tech. Even if it was a bubble, it's like it's so much better than some of the other tech booms where like it falls out, and then what are your durable skills? Just like shilling meme coins, and that's what you're going to do next. It's like, at least if you graduated college, went to work for some hard tech company, it fails, but you learned like system design, like welding, like, DoD, like you learned so much of these like tangible skills. Like at the very least, like, okay, yeah, the VC dollars, they didn't just go all to Facebook. They went into buying manufacturing capacity. Maybe that manufacturing capacity didn't produce profit, so it's got to get rolled into other stuff, but at least we have more machines in America. So 100%. I was always like, there could be like a peace dividend from a bubble, even if there is a bubble and there's a washout. Anyway, do you have a next question, or you want to move on to the continuing resolution?
Let's get into that.
Can you start by like breaking down just how you processed the information and the news around the continuing resolution? Maybe restate what you feel like is going on, and then your take on it.
Well, and I think this is, I won't get too in the weeds, but I think this is really important to fundamentally understand how Congress and how our Department of Defense spends money. And I think like people just read the headlines, the defense news, and they're like, Elon's cutting budget, continuing resolution. And yet all these companies are being funded. Like, what's going on? Like, there's this clear misalignment. I think the reality sits actually a bit more nuanced than that. And when you look at how the Department of Defense spends money and Congress allocates money, we pass this thing called the National Defense Authorization Act. And this is literally the president, Congress, both sides of Congress sit down and they say, what are our needs? What are requirements? And then what they do is they pass a law very clearly that says, here are the budget tables. Here are the things that we're going to be spending money on. And it's this like, I give the Andro guys a ton of credit here. Like, it's rocket science and literally what you're building, but it's not rocket science to figure out what the federal government actually wants. Like we publish these things called J-books every year. We pass laws. And so historically, if Congress and government works the way it's supposed to work, every year we have this new National Defense, Authorization Act that gives the Department of Defense a budget table to say, hey, Air Force, here's $100 million, go buy space lasers. And when that happens, you get this really predictable nature of what's going to be bought, when it's going to be bought, and the quantity. The problem is when you have disruption like we have right now, like politically in the government, and you can't pass an NDAA, and let's be honest, like this has happened a lot in the past. You do this thing called a continuing resolution. And a continuing resolution, just as Delian said, is this like blanket Band-Aid where you just set an arbitrary period of time in the future and you say, hey, just keep the thing going. Let's keep the thing afloat. Let's kick the can down the road. And this is like, let's be clear, like this is not bad. Like this is not good. Like not how a functioning government should run. But I think the nuance here, and this is like what gets me so giddy and like, to Delian's point, like, like the Matt Steckmans of the world and, those guys aren't like tweeting at him saying like, you're wrong. It's because like those guys who really understand what's happening and how to sell the government, they're actually texting their co-founders and they're sprinting that shit right now. And that's what's happening. So this continuing resolution, the nuance here that happened is, again, like, go read the section, go read the bill yourself. But effectively, the rule was changed where you're allowed for new starts. And new starts is just what it sounds like. It means that you can start a new program and allocate, money towards something new. And again, like there's also a ton of bad in there. There's rescissions. There's like, hey, you can no longer have $100 million for space-based lasers. You can now just have 90. But where the like, and I made this like, there are sharks and there are minnows in this, in your budget, happening right now is the sharks, the guys like Brian Hargis, who's done this at SpaceX and is at Castilian now, like, the Steckmans and the list goes on and on. What they're doing right now is they're looking at each of these new rescinded budget lines, each of these new minimum lines that Congress has gone back and forth on the CR, and they're going to those program offices and they're saying, hey, maybe you don't need 90 million, maybe you need 80. And the nuance here of why this is important is each one of these new budget lines are theoretically, and the key word is theoretically, allowed to be moved around now. And so what I'm seeing in my signal chats and my discussions with both people in government and those, what I would define as like tier one founders and go-getters is like, holy shit, like there's $300 million that, again, it's a big if right now, but there's a lot of money being moved around. And so when I made that comment and when I look at, kind of this broach broadly, like there's so much disruption and there's so much variation of what could happen one way or the other is like, I actually think you're going to see one of two things happen this year. You're going to see a small amount of companies and timing, like anything in venture and starting a company is really important here. If you're in the right spot of the kind of growth journey with your product, and again, like this is the beautiful thing about hard tech, if your product doesn't do what it says it can do, like who cares? Like, move on type thing. And that's the beauty where the chickens are all going to come out to roost for all of us at some point. But again, I just think there's so much in your money up for grabs that I think by the end of the year, and hold me to this, you're going to see 1, 2, 3 companies that will get, high hundreds of millions of dollars of in-year revenue grabbed for real production, real OT contracts that has never happened before in a CR or non-CR.
Very cool. I got a bunch of follow-up questions. It feels like the United States does our defense budgeting and planning. We're like building in public. And like we joke about this all the time. Like building in public for most people, like sure, share maybe some progress, like get excited on the timeline a little bit. But generally, like you're just sort of inviting like unwanted
you're saying
attention.
The CIA's black budget should be 100% of tax revenue? Essentially?
Yeah, but no.
I like that.
No, but like, how does China approach all this stuff? Like, I have no idea, and maybe you don't either, but maybe you have insight. Like, it seems like they wouldn't be like, we're going to just like air our dirty laundry out here and like be like, well,
it's America,
we're going to
baby.
tell, is it, break it down.
Yeah. I mean, at a high level, what we have working against us is, for better or for worse, the Chinese government is pumping an insane amount of state and federal dollars towards these critical technologies. Like, there's a VC ecosystem that exists, obviously, but like it is in, it's nothing in compared to the amount of money that China as a state entity is putting behind everything from rocket launch systems to missiles to autonomous systems to AI ecosystem. And what you don't have, obviously, in the United States is you don't have this massive kind of call it industrial complex where it's like, we have this thing called SIBRs, these small business innovation research grants that like are $2, $3, $4 million that help people get off the ground. So there's this huge like parity of just R&D spend that is happening. And when it's coming from the government, it might not be efficient, but it's so large in a way where you're just able to fail 500 times. And like, it's not like the VC fund goes out of business and, it's like, the government will keep existing and keep pumping dollars into it. I think the edge we have here, because I'm an optimistic, cold-blooded American as opposed to a doomer and gloomer, is I actually think the competitive ecosystem we have, and I've told this to everyone in government who will listen to me, and again, this might be controversial, but like we need to stop funding a single SIBR in our DoD and in our federal government. And the reason I think that is like in a historic world, SIBRs have been this thing to get a company off the ground to like, hey, I need some money to develop something. And that's like net good for like entrepreneurs and people. But now you have this wonderful thing called, venture capital ecosystem who's now said, hey, I'm actually really interested in the risk in this. And I believe in your vision and I want to back you. You actually get the right incentive alignment here, where if we do our job right, and I say collectively, like me, Delian, GCs, the whole list of folks, then we're going to be funding the right things that have true technology behind them, have the right entrepreneurs and founders who get what they're doing. And so I would much rather take our system, just to be totally blunt and honest, than this Chinese, like, let's pump trillions of dollars. And they're doing that because I think this is more efficient. And I think the cream's going to rise to the top of like, you're going to see, again, not 100 Andurils, I hate to say it, but you're going to see some pretty large companies that are solving real problems for the Department of Defense.
There's
you mentioned space lasers randomly.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so this ties into kind of a question I had, which is within defense tech, there's technical risk and then there's distribution risk, and it's almost like the distribution risk kind of weighs over the technical risk, because even if you're building like autonomous submarine products, well then it's like you could build the amazing product, maybe you can't actually sell through, but on the tying off of the space lasers thing, like because there's so much distribution risk, are we taking enough technical risk? Are we funding enough sort of like weird science fiction, or is that better suited for skunkworks in the government and or do we need to get weirder?
I actually think it's the right question, and it, I'm biased obviously, and I see how we do things at Lightspeed. I think about things in a spectrum of like, on one end of the spectrum, you have what I call like true science and technology risk. Like this is the like bits and atoms thing. Like if a fusion reaction doesn't take place, like you don't have anything, like there's nothing there. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the kind of commercial products that we know exist. Like we can get a car to drive, we can get a software system to kind of, be a CRM or whatever. It's like, you have arguably no tech risk on that end, but you have huge kind of product market fit, like customer go-to-market risk. I think the holy grail, and again, we take this approach at Lightspeed, is like, number one, like you need to build a portfolio that's really thoughtful about the type of risk that you take. So on one end of the spectrum, I wouldn't take fully science and technology risk. On the other end of the spectrum, you're not going to have big enough outcomes if you're just making another CRM or a software tool to apply to the government. The sweet spot, in my opinion, is what I define as these like systems companies. And again, like, Anduril, I'll use Anduril as an example here because everybody knows them, but it's like, there's a clear software kind of component to what they do. They're going after end systems. They're building really hard shit that's hard to do. There's some physics kind of, like barriers to kind of figure out. But the beauty is each new system you add as a systems company only makes that flywheel on go-to-market that you've secured, before easier. Like, again, when you're a multi-product company and like, Saronic's getting there now, like other, Castilian will get there eventually, K2 and Space will get there too. Like once you've made one sale and made one customer really happy, you show up with the next 4, 5, 6 different products and you have credibility, you have contract history, you have the ability to actually deliver and do what you said you would do. I mean, the dirty little secret that everyone knows about Anduril is like, the acquisition machine that they are with like APP and Grimm and Babak and the team there's like they're taking things that are cool pieces of technology and they're 100xing them and it's like nobody else can do that. That is such a unique kind of ability as one of these systems companies. So I think if you're a venture capitalist here, number one, like go back to my statement before, you need to know what real problems are. If you don't know what real problems are and if you don't know where government is spending money, you're shit out of luck. You're just going to be wandering and throwing money at the hot thing. But if you know where the pots of money are, if you know what the needs are, and you do this really balanced approach of some physics risk, some, kind of go-to-market risk, and then you just have a bunch of these systems companies that can get really, really big. I mean, again, I think that's how you return venture funds. I mean, that's what I'm in the business. That's what we're in the business of doing at Lightspeed.
Great insights. Do you think there's our show is oriented around venture, but in order for some of these, venture-backed companies to actually do what they need to do, they need to partner with a bunch of small businesses to actually produce, everything from individual parts and things like it. Do you think there's an opportunity for like basically SMBs to pop up to service some of these venture-backed companies that want to focus on the technical risk and selling, but then they have to produce a bunch of components as well, and they can't, make 2,000 parts for a single, missile, right?
Yeah. I mean, let's be clear, and I'll actually be really blunt about this. I think how this entire ecosystem, both from an entrepreneurial and a VC, perspective, like defense tech, how this goes wrong is we actually cannot deliver on the systems that we are selling the government. I actually think the snowball of like accepting new tech, while it's still small in the grand scheme of things of the budget, I do fundamentally believe that snowball has started to move. And so how we fail, to be clear, is that if we cannot produce at scale with efficiency in the scopes that we say they were going to do it, and for better or for worse, like we don't have an industrial base in the United States to solve that. Like we don't have. I mean, the mom and pop shops are dying. I've visited them. From Southern California initially, you go out into the kind of desert there, and it's like one guy after one guy after one. He's built like a $7 million business doing this one thing over and over again. Those guys are dying. We do not have an industrial base to serve this. So the question, and this is like the real big, people push me all the time, like, how is this bubble going to pop? How is this going to fail? It's if companies like those systems companies can't find a way to vertically integrate themselves, or they can't figure out a long tail supply chain of how to produce not just a couple hundreds of these systems, but 1,000, then I think we're in real deep doo-doo. And you've been in this situation where you've oversold and underdelivered, and you don't keep billion-dollar contracts if you do that. So I think we have to. Like, can SMBs do it? I don't know. Maybe it's Chris at Hadrian. Like maybe it's the long tail defense techs. I mean, yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, we'll find out very, very soon.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. In terms of, there's this meme of like, maybe it's very risky to directly compete with Anduril on a program that they might be launching like next month. Like they launch very quickly. But what is interesting to you? Where do you see the opportunities in hard tech, but non-competitive with Anduril? We talked to AJ at Hermeus. I don't think Anduril has plans to work on a Mach 5 autonomous plane or passenger airliner. Hadrian and even like a Rainmaker. Like it is like Anduril hard tech coded, but it's so far afield that it feels safe to work on. What would your advice be for the next generation of hard tech engineers?
I mean, again, like I'll start with the same through line I said before. There's not going to be 100 Andurils. Like Anduril has a clear, unique market positioning of how they build different products into their family of systems. Mm-hmm. I think the way to think about it, both as an entrepreneur and as an investor, is I actually think about like, unique fences you can draw around, not just around like a technical product, a system, but also a customer. And I think this is like really important when, if you don't understand how the DoD works, like the Navy has all their different program offices that like some for underwater, some for surface, some for missiles. And those program managers, like they want their solution to build the better thing to then, deliver better tools to the Navy. So if you can be unique enough, and part of this is like, yes, looking at what the large guys are doing like Anduril and SpaceX and et cetera, you need to be nuanced enough initially with your product that you're showing up to the table with something new where it's like, Anvil is kind of doing that, or Roadrunner's kind of that thing, so I might as well just buy that because Anduril's been already there, they're already in the room, they already have the need. But I think the nuance here is like if you can make a leap from a customer and a system to an adjacent enough thing where Anduril might be in the ecosystem, there's still a really massive opportunity to be built. I mean, Saronic's a great example of that. Like Saronic is like off to the races now and building a bunch of autonomous boats, and like it's going to be amazing to see what Dino does. But like Anduril's underwater. Like Anduril's building autonomous systems. And I do think there's a world where both of these companies actually work really well together. And, in this wonderful world where we're doing teaming and orchestration, a bunch of multiple autonomous systems, you want as many people orchestrating on the same platform as possible. I think the last thing I'll say is just like where this goes wrong. This goes wrong in a way where both Anduril, but also these companies start to build kind of stovepipes around what they're doing. And there's like really basic examples like, we want to get to a world where we have Skynet, where these systems are kind of talking to each other and playing out. And if you don't allow your infrastructure, your software infrastructure to work with other things, then number one, like you're creating a really adversarial environment with Anduril and other big guys. So in my opinion, like working with Anduril as opposed to working against Anduril is the answer here.
Mm-hmm. Jordy, what you got?
This has all been great. I don't think I have any. I think that covered the one thing I was wondering how you're advising portfolio companies right now. We're in a sort of defense tech bubble. We've sort of aligned on that, and it can be a good thing. And so there's definitely a push for companies to take advantage of that and say like you have a short period of time potentially before there's a cooling off period and maybe there's less investor interest, and certain investors maintain long-term conviction, but then certain others, pull out or pull back. How are you advising portfolio companies on like, you need to move super quickly because, there are these sort of behemoths that are going to be built in the next few years, but at the same time, you want to be conservatives because if a contract, if it takes you an extra year and a half to get a contract and then you run out of money, like it just doesn't matter. So like, how do you advise?
I'll actually take it one step further, which is like, if you believe you're going to win a contract in the near future and you don't make that decision to raise more capital now, you actually can't deliver on the contract. Like back to my comment of like, you got to produce real things. And if you don't have capital to build out the factory, to build out all the testing infrastructure, like you can't do it. So I again, like most things, it's a bit nuanced. I mean, the advice that I give portfolio companies is there becomes a terminal value or a value of your business that you only have one path to go. And again, this number is maybe moving a little bit, but it's like the second you start to raise above 500 million, both early early investors will get a good outcome, but near-term investors and you as a company, like you're either going to be a public company or you're going to be bought for a private equity multiple. And I think the level of conviction that founders have internally on the ability to win real production contracts or the ability to deliver and get to a technology milestone should be that like internal like test of a founder of like, do I have line of sight to that? Do I believe that will happen? And if the answer is yes, then again, like you're going to need the money, then I advise founders is like, let's take the swing. Like we're in this to build massive companies. I'm not in this to build a company that gets sold to Lockheed for parts, like, whatever, maybe good outcome for a founder, but that's not what we all play for in this ecosystem. We want to build generational companies and I want to back generational founders. So it's really just that internal sense of like, all right, like this is the product. We believe we're going to win the product or we're going to win the contract. So let's do it. And so it's I don't know, you put your pillow down head on your pillow at night when you're a founder. And if you know, even all the risk and all the being punched in the stomach, that there's true line of sight to real production contract value, then raise the money. I think the time is right.
Can you give me a little bit of a crash course on KPIs, multiples, like what stats are important for defense tech companies as they're growing? Obviously in SaaS, we know triple, double. We know ARR and churn. What are you looking at in a growth stage defense tech company?
the geometry of defense tech, company growth looks unlike anything else. Like it doesn't look like software. It doesn't look like consumer. What it looks like nine times out of 10, and there are some anomalies here, and I actually think there are going to be some anomalies during this continuing resolution, but 9 times out of 10, you get this really small, like SIBR revenue. Like I don't have a system yet. I got to develop the thing. I got to go get someone to pay me for some small, like $2, $3, $4, $5 million R&D money. And as an investor in this ecosystem, I actually discount all of that revenue to zero. I don't, whatever. It's not like we're applying multiples at the early stage, but you see this like middling. And then you see, again, this just stepwise change and improvement where, people overuse the term, program of record. Most times it's actually not a true program of record. Like, it's actually either just a really large OT other than transactional authority or something like that. But then you see this stepwise change of like, okay, you got, children dollars, and then you got this massive kind of, call it 200, 300, $400 million contract. And so the KPI that I always think about is like, there's a separate technical timeline of de-risking your system. And like, it's our job as investors to roll up our sleeves and be like, is there real progress? Can we see this? Is there more testing? Like what's happening from an iteration perspective? But then the holy grail is like, and this is where you're either really smart as an investor or you're really dumb, is, you make you lead with the preemptive term sheet, you make the investment actually right before that tick and right before that big production. Because the beauty is you win a $300 million production contract. Yeah, maybe it's over a couple years, but like that's the base cash line of your business. And that's the like get out of jail free card of like, hey, now we're not using a ton of venture dollars to develop the next thing, to build the next factory. So to me, it's like you get that internal feeling of where we are, like how close we are to those programs. And like, it's not a clean, net dollar retention is this, you're doubling year over year, tripling year over year. You just got to be nuanced, and you got to know what the hell, program offices care about and how they move.
That makes a lot of sense.
I've loved having you on.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much.
Fun.
This is really
guys.
Any when you're next time you're putting $500 million into a cool company, join with the founder.
Yeah,
we'd love to have you both on.
That'd be amazing.
Guys. Well, I appreciate it. Love what you guys are doing. Huge fan.
Thanks so much.
All right,
awesome.
Chat soon.
Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.